Today we're looking into another potential scam. We're looking at PSA and the entire grading system that they have on trading cards. And what a better time to do this than right now, where in New York City, just this past weekend, the Fanatics Fest NYC went down, which was a place where people come together, celebrities, athletes, and normal people like you and I, to get signatures, to see athletes, and of course to buy many of these collectibles. This is pretty popular because many people know of Logan Paul selling his Pikachu card for $16.5 million, which is a big part of what we're talking about today. Thank you guys for subscribing. Now let's dive in and see if this is a scam or if it's legit.
PSA has the power to turn a singular Pokemon card into a multi-million-dollar asset. When Logan Paul's ultra-rare Pikachu Illustrator was given a PSA 10 grade, it became worth over $16 million. A single grade point lower and the card's value drops to $1.4 million. But when one company has the ability to create or erase millions of dollars with a single number, there's bound to be corruption. And a recent pattern of major screw-ups has many people suspicious of PSA. They've authenticated cards that were altered to look perfect. Their grading system has been exposed as extremely inconsistent, and they've even admitted to straight up destroying high-value cards during their process.
Each of these topics are going to be discussed in depth here, and I have something to say about everything that's discussed here. Every step of the way, there is something that's going wrong with PSA.
And those are just the mistakes that we can 100% prove. There are countless grading decisions that happen every single day that are losing people hundreds, thousands, and in extreme cases, millions of dollars. Which is why when you dig deeper into PSA, the more insane it becomes that a multi-billion-dollar industry revolves around a tiny number on a piece of plastic. Before PSA became synonymous with corporate greed, they were actually providing an extremely consumer-friendly service.
Yeah, when you think about it, something like this is important. It's maybe even necessary. We have collectibles that hold value. There needs to be a way of determining that value, the rarity, the popularity, the condition of the cards. So the idea of PSA grading cards is actually a great idea, and honestly a necessity in today's day and age where collecting is really a form of investing. But PSA has a monopoly.
PSA, which stands for Professional Sports Authenticator, offered a universal standard to determine how much a card was worth. Think back to elementary school at the lunch table. Your friend has a bag of chips, and you're willing to give up your ding-dong in exchange for it. The chips aren't objectively more valuable than the ding-dong, but if both of you are satisfied with the trade, then it really doesn't matter. Sports cards and trading cards used to be the same way. Maybe I wanted your Charizard card and you wanted my Pikachu card. We'd just swap them and be done with it. But eventually how rare the cards were became a factor to consider in the trade. All of those factors is what PSA considered to determine how much a card was worth, which resulted in people paying big money for cards in all different niches. PSA essentially created the industry standard guide of what matters when buying or selling cards.
All right, and that's good, right? Like taking a look at this and saying, this is what we're looking for. If all of this is cool, then this is what the grade should be. But it gets so much more intricate than just this, especially when we're talking about cards that have million-dollar values.
In a close inspection, a trained PSA grader validates a card's authenticity, ensuring that it is officially licensed merchandise and not a knockoff. They assess any potential damage, such as rips, tears, scuffs, folds, and finally, they give a grade to the card's overall condition on a 1 to 10 scale. And at the end, they carefully encapsulate the card in a protective case to preserve its condition, with a label displaying its name and official PSA grade. Before PSA was rotting the industry from its core, it was actually meant to preserve the integrity of it. But as their power and influence grew, they started moving away from being a humble service for hobbyists and developing into a corporation fully fixated on profits.
Yes, and let's mention this. It's not free to have your cards graded, and it's actually not even a fixed price to have your cards graded. We're going to get into the details of that in just a few minutes, but I have to ask, while he's showing all of these cards on the screen, how many of you are looking at them saying, do I have that card in my collection? I know I am.
PSA expanded their company beyond just grading cards. They integrated with eBay to create the PSA Vault, which helps store, list, sell, and ship trading cards for their customers. So if you wanted to sell your recently graded card, you could have them take care of the entire selling process from start to finish with little effort.
Right, so what they're saying is PSA will grade your card, then you could sell your card to them based off of that grade. Then they can sell your card. So you're trusting the company that's grading your card, telling you what it's worth on what that is. You're not getting a second opinion. You're not doing maybe some other research. You're essentially sending in your card and saying, what's the value? I'll pay you whatever the value is, and then you could sell it for whatever. You're trusting that they're grading it properly.
PSA even offered a buyback service where they would purchase the card directly after grading, and some interpret this as kind of a conflict of interest. You're handing a company your card, they're deciding how much it's worth, and then they're offering to buy it from you themselves. If they plan on reselling the card for a profit, they have every incentive to convince you it's worth a little less than it actually is. It's like when Rick from Pawn Stars calls in one of his buddies to tell you what your rare artifact is worth, and almost every time, it's worth way less than what you thought it was. From there, PSA's parent company, which is confusingly called Collectors, also acquired rival grading services Beckett and SGC, getting them closer to becoming a monopoly. Today, PSA and its sister companies take up 80% of the total market, with PSA accounting for a whopping 72%. And that dominance comes with an immense responsibility. The trading card market is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, and basically every collector on the planet relies on PSA's labels to determine that each card they received was authentic and in perfect condition. In 2017, a 1952 Stan Musial baseball card sold for $2,800. It had slight imperfections, including a black dot on the border as well as a few small scuffs on his jersey. All things considered, the card was still in great condition and received a PSA grade 9. 7 months later, another copy of the card was sold, this time a PSA grade 10, for a price of $28,100.
All right, so it went from $2,800 to $28,000, or very close to that. It's essentially 10 times the value from a grade 9 to a grade 10. But what is the facts and the truth behind this card is actually really interesting.
The problem is, these were the same exact card. Natural markings on the back of both were identical, meaning that someone had covered up its imperfections and resubmitted it to PSA, got a higher grade, and made tens of thousands of dollars. PSA is supposed to inspect every card closely before giving it a grade. It checks for scratches, scuffs, and imperfections, but it also ensures that the card is both authentic and unaltered. Like when you and I look at a PSA 8, 9, or 10, we just kind of say, yeah, I mean, it looks perfect. But PSA's job is to notice the tiny things that we never would. Maybe someone repainted a tiny white chip on the edge, or they trimmed a fraction of a millimeter off the border, or they managed to fix a crease that used to be there.
All right, so what this is telling me right now, as someone that is not I have cards from when I was a kid. I was a collector, but nothing to this level. This could be an entire business of purchasing PSA 8 and 9 cards, refurbishing them, fixing those minute, tiny imperfections, and then getting them regraded to a grade 10. Because if the value goes up from a grade 9 to a grade 10, let's just say 10 times in value, you could buy a card for $1,000, fix the minor imperfections, get it regraded as a 10, and you instantly made yourself $9,000. Let's say $8,000 after fees. That is an entire business in itself, if this PSA system is not locked down and legit.
And even still, you might wonder what the big deal is. I mean, if a card can be restored to pristine condition, then why should it matter if it was original or not? Well, it's because the history of a card is a major factor in its value. To see a card preserved for almost 70 years without a single flaw doesn't just make it worth more money, it's also just objectively cool. And this is not just true for cards, it's really true for about anything that is rare. The flowing hair silver dollar sold for $10 million in 2013. That's because this coin was the first dollar coin issued by the United States federal government in 1794.
All right, so I could at least say that this coin right here, $10 million, that is a piece of United States history. The Charizard card that sold for $16 million is a Pokemon card. Now, I know I'm not a Pokemon enthusiast, and if you're watching this and you are, you're probably like, what is this guy even talking about? In my opinion, there's a huge difference between a trading card or a sports card or something like that and an actual piece of American history like a coin.
Somehow, someway, this little coin was preserved for 220 years. If nobody cared about preserving anything that was rare, then we'd all just buy one-to-one bootlegs. Authenticity matters, and PSA was meant to ensure all aspects of a card were authentic, but they messed up too many times to count.
Yeah.
A Billy Maloney card from the early 1900s was purchased for $81 before being altered, regraded, and sold for a $900 profit.
Yeah, look right there. It was at a 4.5. Got regraded, fixed up a tiny bit, got up to a 7, and almost 10 times its value.
A 1952 Mickey Mantle card was altered and resold for $14,800. Ironically, a separate Stan Musial card from 1948 had its edges trimmed and sold for a nearly $2,000 profit. By 2019, hundreds of examples of altered cards that PSA had improperly graded had piled up, culminating in a class action lawsuit. The lawsuit went further than accusing PSA of making a few mistakes. It argued that trained graders should have been able to recognize the alteration and alleged that PSA knowingly allowed them to enter the market regardless. The situation became too large for PSA to ignore, and they announced an internal investigation into the matter. Now, to be fair, PSA grades millions of cards every year, and these alterations were done specifically by the seller to deceive trained authenticators into getting a higher grade. It is possible that these specific instances were genuine mistakes, and someone just figured out how to beat the authenticators. But whether PSA approved the cards knowingly or made a genuine mistake, the result for buyers was the same.
And there's something else that we have to talk about here. We're talking about people getting the cards and altering them, right? Like, so I get a PSA 7 and I fix something minute up. Maybe I trim the edge a fraction, just a hair, just to make it a sharper edge. And it gets bumped up a grade or two, in turn, making the value a lot more. I could even potentially sell it to them for more with the new service that they offer. But what about the authenticators themselves? There have to be hundreds, maybe even thousands, I don't know how large this company is, of people like you and I authenticating these cards. They went through a class, they went through a course, they got certified. They are certified authenticators. You can't tell me that I could take one card, give that same card to a line of 100 authenticators, and that they are all going to come back to me with the same exact score and rating for that same card.
Altered cards entered the market with legitimate grades that people thought were original and could be sold for far more money than they were worth, which made people start to wonder if that little number in the corner could really be trusted.
Yeah.
Sometimes customers are disappointed with the grade their card gets. Maybe they thought it was a perfect 10, but PSA found a small imperfection that bumped it down to a 9. The customer now has two choices. They can accept the result and sell the card, or they can resubmit it to PSA and hope for a better result. Pokemon card collector and YouTuber Pokemon Steven submitted approximately 10,000 cards to be graded by PSA over the past couple of years. A little under 200 of his cards received unsatisfactory gradings. He believed that these cards were actually 10s, so he decided to resubmit them on the off chance that someone had made a mistake, and the results were shocking.
81 PSA 10s. From the regrade experiment, 189 cards in total, so 108 cards did not make the cut.
81 of the resubmitted cards were bumped up from a PSA 9 to a PSA 10. That's 42%.
So 42% of the cards. Now, he is a knowledgeable collector. If you are in the same position, if you are a knowledgeable collector, you really know that, maybe even you're a grader that's a collector as well. What's stopping you from testing the system? What's stopping you from purchasing a grade 8 or a grade 9 and then getting it regraded? Trying to get that next bump up to 10 times your value. Get something from $100 up to $1,000, or get something from $1,000 up to $10,000. Remember how we were talking about that line of 100 people and I kept giving them all the same card? In my opinion, if you give them a card enough times, you're going to eventually get, as long as you're knowledgeable about your own products that you have, you're going to eventually get that one person that gives it that next grade up. and that 10 times is the value of your card. Is this a scam? Yeah, it kind of is, but it's totally being done by people, and it's because of the breakdown of the system, because we're 100% relying on human vision and human authentication of these cards. I feel like there needs to be more than just that, because not all humans are going to look at the same thing and see the same thing and give the same grade.
But he had not changed the card at all. The corners, the art, the surface were all exactly the same as when he submitted them the first time. The only thing that changed was the grade itself. And as discussed prior, the difference between these two grades can mean the difference of hundreds, thousands, and in extreme cases, millions of dollars. What one inspector views as a 9, the other may view as a 10. And it's starting to seem like the only difference is how lucky you are when your card is being reviewed. PSA's grading system is supposed to be an objective measurement of the card's condition, but as more controversies pile up, the grading seems subjective. Just goes to show that people are insane for paying such a massive premium for 10s. PSA is a huge scam, but resubmitting the card could also hurt its value.
True.
Another collector submitted over 100 cards to be regraded, 19 were given higher grades, but 34 of them were actually given a worse grade. But why does this happen? I mean, the rules are clear enough. 4 perfectly sharp corners, full original gloss, no stains or no scratches, with a slight allowance for printing imperfections. The problem is that a human grader still has to decide what counts as perfect. Maybe there's a small mark in the artwork that one grader notices while the other one doesn't. What one grader sees as a printing imperfection, another may view as an unnatural defect that bumps its grade down. So now, submitting to PSA is like gambling, especially when you consider the fees associated with this process. Submitting to PSA for grading costs $25 per card plus shipping, and they do offer slight discounts for bulk submissions. But think about it, if you get a low grade, your card could be worth less than $25, meaning it costs more to authenticate and grade than it's actually worth. However, if your card is worth more, PSA will charge you insane amounts of money to do the exact same grading as a worthless card.
And this is something that I don't think is fair.
Like Nico, who submitted his rare Mickey Mouse card that was worth $20,000 to PSA, only for them to charge him $1,000 for his perfect 10 grade.
I feel that no matter what the card, and I'm not sure why they do this, maybe it's to prevent people from continuously select or sending the same card in for grading, but if they grade my card, if it's a 5 or if it's a 9 or if it's a 10, isn't it the same process? Shouldn't the card grading process cost the same amount of money? In my opinion, it should, unless if the process in some way changes, which it doesn't.
Or Scruffy, who was charged $150 for a 10 grade 2021 Pokemon Sword and Shield Evolving Skies, and $600 for a 9 grade 2002 Charizard Reverse Foil. There's also John, who was told by PSA his card was worth $25,000, which is why he needed to pay them $1,000 to authenticate it, but then his card only sold for half the value they claimed it was worth. And no, they didn't give him a $500 discount and say, oops, we messed up. And he still made a great profit, but remember that the grading process for all of these cards is exactly the same, and you don't know what they are going to charge you until after they have already done the service.
And also remember, no matter what the value is and what the grade is, there still has to be the desire for that card. You have to have the buyer out there for that card. So PSA may tell me that the card that I have is worth $10,000, but if there's no buyer for it for $10,000, I still may need to sell it at a lower price if I'm looking to sell it.
This has led some collectors to accuse PSA of intentionally having inconsistent grading so people will just keep submitting their cards for additional gradings. This is unlikely considering they've been shown to both overgrade and undergrade cards. Then again, there are stories that make it easy to understand why some collectors still remain skeptical. The most notable example of this is when a collector named Preston submitted 30 separate Pikachu Zekrom GX cards to PSA for grading. He anticipated that most of them would be perfect 10s, but he was shocked to discover that none of them received a perfect grade, with the vast majority of them receiving PSA 9s. In spite of his disappointment, Preston opted to sell the cards through PSA's Buyback service. However, he kept records of the serial numbers on his cards and searched them later online to discover that 11 of them had been listed as perfect 10s.
So, PSA graded his cards, mostly 9s. He sold them through their service to them at that 9 value. kept the SKUs, and then looked them up for sale, and they were actually listed as 10s. So PSA graded them as 9s, bought them at the cost of 9s, and then sold them as 10s. That is a scam.
Around this time, a PSA 9 of this exact card was going for around $41, while a PSA 10 was nearly $200, meaning that PSA bought them from him as a 9 and sold them as a 10.
5 times the value.
And Preston missed out on around $1,500 for all 11 cards. And this highlights the conflict of interest I mentioned before. The only people who can change a grade are PSA themselves. So if they are authenticating and buying and selling cards, they could theoretically change the grade of any card to maximize their personal profits on the sale.
As you can see, this is a legendary collection reverse PSA 10 Mankey that's listed on eBay by PSA themselves. But if this card is a PSA 10, then why does the back look like this? Because how are they listing a card that looks like this as a PSA 10 on eBay through the PSA eBay account?
Now, if that same card, if they were to break it, resubmit it, guaranteed it's not going to get a 10, because it's not. I can see that it's not a 10. I would even say that that's not even a 9 with the back, the wear on the edges of the cards. So that's actually crazy that they are able to grade it and then sell it at that grade.
They need to get sued more. It's all a scam. I hate that PSA is the one that got popular. However, PSA offered a different explanation. Supposedly, someone at PSA had seen Preston's original post on Twitter. They personally believed that the initial grading was too harsh and conducted a secondary manual review, resulting in updated gradings after Preston had already accepted their offer, which is shady. They conveniently realized that they messed up only after they already bought the cards from him and resold them for a profit. Luckily for Preston, his story got a lot of traction online, and he claims that they privately rectified the situation with him, which I would hope means that they gave him the money he deserves for the cards he unknowingly undersold to them.
But how many times does this happen where they don't post it on X or on Reddit and it doesn't get social promotion and people do get ripped off? His case, having posted it, is 1 in a million that actually happens, and they did it because they had to try to show face and do the right thing.
But that still doesn't feel like a satisfying conclusion, and it still didn't explain why the cards were undergraded in the first place. A fellow collector claimed that cards tend to be undergraded by PSA when they receive bulk quantities of the same card. I guess the logic is that when you look at the same card over and over again, you maybe start to see imperfections that aren't there. Or maybe the same person is just going over all of them and is like, surely they can't all be 10s, so here's a 9. But obviously that would be corrupt and unethical business practices.
Yes,
but most importantly, PSA did not make the situation right with Preston until after he went viral on social media and gave them bad publicity. Was Preston the only person this has ever happened to? Or was he just lucky enough to get attention online and put pressure on PSA to pay him what they owed? But one of the most insane controversies that gained traction online was when PSA admitted they damaged someone's extremely rare card, and many saw this as the final nail in the coffin for their reputation. A man named Brian revealed that his PSA 10 Pokemon card was severely damaged while getting it reholdered by PSA, bumping it all the way down to a grade 6. The card was a sky-splitting Deoxys, an extremely rare card released in limited quantities in 2004 and never printed in English. There were very few copies like this and in his condition, making Brian's card almost impossible to replace. Now, Brian was getting his card reholdered. Basically what this means is he already submitted it before and it got a 10, but he was paying them to crack open the old plastic case and seal the exact same card into a brand new holder. Collectors do this all the time if the slab gets scratched, cracked, or it just looks old. A fresh holder can make an expensive card easier to sell because buyers know the case is brand new and the card had recently been inspected. The problem is that the moment PSA cracks the case open, they're handling one of the rarest cards in the world, and if anything goes wrong, the damage is permanent. PSA acknowledged that they PSA had damaged the card and offered to reimburse Brian the full market value, which they determined to be $20,000. He wasn't happy with this, considering that the same card had sold for up to $45,000 around the same time, with others saying it was worth even more. Multiple people have told me that the Deoxys is $60,000 plus, and I personally have an offer over that. PSA fixed this issue. PSA got the $20,000 figure by averaging all of the recent sales of that same card. And this just seemed like a slap in the face, because at best they're offering half and at worst a third of what it's actually worth. But the problem is they caused the loss of the card and then gave themselves the authority to decide how much that loss was worth. And rather than accepting their deal, Brian took to the internet.
I mean, it all comes down to PSA is the one that determines the value. PSA is the one that determines the sale. They determine every step of the way regarding your collection, and that's the monopoly. That's the problem.
Once again, the community was furious, and this specific situation ramped up to a whole new level once Moist Critical made a video about it.
This is where it gets extremely spicy. That card sold only a couple of weeks ago by PSA. And this is where it gets a little conspiratorial, but I think there's a lot of merit to it. There are people that are speculating that they didn't actually damage his card when reholdering it. The encapsulation process, it's a psyop, it's not real. What they're thinking might have happened is PSA, when reholdering that PSA 10 Deoxys that was submitted, they took it and then sold it themselves, and then instead gave him a 6, saying that it was damaged and now it's down to a 6.
But if that were to be the case, and if that was what would happen, wouldn't it be traceable by the SKU, by the ID number on the card? It would be trackable, so that would be crazy and easy to kind of follow up on, no?
I guess PSA now stands for Pro Scam Artists. Critical brought awareness to this dispute far outside the card collecting community, putting PSA under more pressure than ever before. Brian announced they had come to an agreement that he was satisfied with, indicating that he was compensated for the proper market value of his card. By this point, the pattern becomes a bit too familiar. PSA rejected a complaint, the collector went public on the internet, and then the company changed their mind after the story went viral. There are dozens of other examples of PSA destroying their customers' cards, and you have to wonder if these individuals were ever given proper compensation. Probably not, because a massive YouTuber didn't make a video about them. And now I'm just genuinely curious if anyone watching has ever had this happen to them. Like, you submitted a card to PSA and you know for a 100% fact that they messed up your card.
Now that's kind of subjective, right? Because if you're someone that has something, there's some value, sentimental value there. So you may look at the card and say, that is a 10, that is perfect. But we are not PSA trained people. So we really, unless if you are, so we really don't have the ability to make that assumption. And I'm wondering, even if you get a card like right out of the pack, if you're ripping a pack and you get a crazy card, is it a 10 out of the pack? Or could they even come, not up to a 10 grade straight out of the pack because of imperfections upon printing?
And then sent it back, but hoped that you'd never notice? Comment below if that happened. PSA's grade is supposed to be a symbol of reliability and prestige, but these days their reputation isn't much better than a sketchy pawn shop. And yet, people are still sending in millions of cards to PSA every single year. But why? Well, the thing is, most collectors don't continue to use PSA because they trust them. They continue because they have no other realistic option. There are other companies that do gradings, but a card with a PSA label can sell for far more than the same card graded by a competitor. Leaving PSA for another authenticator would significantly cut down the overall value of someone's collection. And with the prices for some of these cards, we're talking about millions of dollars in value right down the drain.
So what this takes is someone massive, someone like a Logan Paul with a massive collection and a massive online presence, to make this switch, to make the push out of PSA, which probably won't happen because he then, or that whoever that person would then be taking a massive hit on their collection itself. But let's say me. Not that I have a big following, I'm a small content creator, but what if I wanted to create a PSA-like company? If I wanted to go through the training, learn how to really perfect these cards, build a team, and build an AI element behind it as well. So initially cards are checked by AI, then they're double checked by an actual person. So you're getting a double check along the way, not just getting a check based off of one person. And if I had a fee that was standard across all different cards, if I give you a grade of a 5 or a 10, it's still going to cost you $50 per card. What if a company were to come out like that and the grading was actually so pristine and even more perfect? Could it actually shut down something like PSA? I think it would have to have massive people behind it with a lot of reach to get the word out.
Boycotting won't work because all collectors would have to do it together. The market has decided that PSA is the gold standard, and it's almost impossible to go against what the market wants. As long as buyers seek out PSA graded cards, sellers will continue to sell them, which means that they will just have to deal with whatever nonsense comes with working with PSA. This is why monopolies are supposed to be illegal. But above all else, PSA is just another example of how any hobby or niche eventually gets hijacked and exploited by corporations. The same thing happened with sneakers. Any regular person who wants to occasionally, maybe once a year or every other year, buy a nice pair of sneakers has to deal with insane price gouging, unavailability of sizes because collectors or resellers pay thousands of dollars just to let a pair collect dust on a shelf. Shoes turned into a status symbol, and now it's trading cards. Actually playing with your Pokemon card could scratch the artwork, and wearing your sneakers could scuff them up, which will devalue them, which is ironic because most people buy nice things because they want to actually use nice things, but the only way to protect the value is to avoid enjoying it for what it is. And unfortunately, no hobby is safe from this. It's only going to get worse. Once people begin to put a price on their favorite pastime, they make way for opportunists to take advantage of the hobby and get rich.
So in your opinion, is PSA corrupt? Or are they genuinely trying to do their best, but maybe their system just needs a little bit of fine tuning, a little bit more finesse? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you want to see what we normally talk about in this channel, check out this video. I'll see you guys over there.